What historical events are so absurd that they would be too strange for a fiction story or a movie? I got one for you. Ex-Nazi and cult leader pedophile Paul Schaffer was so obsessed with having the children of his compound, Colonial dignidad, love him and only him, that he once took all of the children of the compound to a river where he had someone dressed as Santa Claus floating on a raft. He then shot and killed Santa in front of all the children and told them all that Santa's dead. The only holiday we ever need to celebrate here is my birthday. The Spanish conquistadors found platinum during their search for gold and dumped all of it in the sea because they thought platinum was inferior to silver. Oil was treated similarly before oil was useful. Wojtek, the soldier bear, he served in the Polish army in World War II, helping his fellow soldiers by carrying heavy crates of ammunition into battle, saving precious time during combat. He had been recruited as a soldier when his division had to board an English ship which didn't allow animals on board. Outraged, the Polish then made him a soldier and he lived through the war to die of old age in a zoo in 1963. An extra bit of the story is that after World War II, soldiers who were close to Wojtek would hop into his exhibit bringing him beer and wrestling with Wojtek. Battle of Kerensebes. That time in the 1700s when the Austrian army got confused, waged a huge battle against itself within its own lines, and lost an estimated several hundred to few thousand men, and a lot of equipment and money, in the process. They then retreated. The Ottomans, whom they were originally intending to fight, showed up 2 days later. Douglas Bader, RAF flying ace, 23 kills, though he had previously lost both his legs in separate flying accidents. He wore a pair of clunky tin legs. He was shot down over France in 1941. The Luftwaffe was so pleased to have captured him they arranged for the RAF to drop a pair of his legs at a designated time and place, and cleared the sky for the drop to proceed. The RAF did indeed drop the legs as arranged, but since all German fighters and ack had been stood down as arranged, it seemed a waste not to bomb a nearby enemy airfield. Meanwhile, Bader, stumping about on his tin legs, was a great hit with his Nazi captors. At a great party held by the Luftwaffe in his honor, he drank them under the table, excused himself to a third-floor bathroom, shinned down a drainpipe and stumped off into the darkness. He was only recaptured by a German spy in the resistance. For the next 4 years he continually escaped and was recaptured until he was finally sent to Colditz. After the war, there was a great spirit of reconciliation and togetherness between the air forces on both sides. Bader was not convinced. He was invited to address a crowd of assembled now ex-Luftwaffe pilots and began his speech with the words, "Seeing so many of you here today, I am struck by the single thought, I didn't kill enough of you bastards." This was already made into a great movie, Reach for the Sky. It was one of my favorites as a kid. His story is incredible. The Toronto Circus riot of 1855. The fire department and some clowns get into a disagreement at a whorehouse and get into a punch-up. The clowns win, but the firemen return to the circus later and start attacking in revenge. The firemen win the day, but violence is stopped when the militia come in. The police do nothing, so the city fires all the police, and I mean everyone, and starts a new police force. This absolute absurdity of this paragraph amazes me. What the frick? John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on the same day, the 50th anniversary of the 4th of July. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." Which is ironic, because Jefferson was already dead. My personal favorite, the cadaver synod, in which the dead body of a former pope was disinterred, propped up on the throne, and then formally tried by the church to have his papacy retroactively annulled. Predictably, he was found guilty. Then they chucked his corpse in the Tiber. People are funny animals. May have been said already, but when Napoleon returned to France from his exile, a regiment of French soldiers were sent by the coalition powers to intercept him. Upon seeing them, Napoleon approached and simply said, "If you wish to kill your emperor, here I am." The commander of the regiment ordered his men to open fire. Out of the 2,000 soldiers present, not a single one obeyed the order. They all joined Napoleon and marched to Paris with him. Truly a real-life Mary Sue, at least until he was thoroughly beaten and exiled again, permanently this time. Maybe not an event, but pretty absurd. In an attempt to claim control of the former Spanish Empire's territories in the Americas, the French ruler, Napoleon III, created the term Latin America because if the territories were Spanish, or formally, then the French had no right to them. But if he got the world to call it Latin, which the French were considered a branch of, then Napoleon III could attempt to take them for a new, glorious, French Empire. This would also reassure the British, US, and Dutch that he was not going after their American territories, since they were not Latin countries. In other words, we call Hispanics of the Americas Latin because it was French propaganda used to legitimize their rule over South and Central America. Much of European history was kings trying to re-establish themselves as the rulers of the new Roman Empire. It's astounding how much effort was put into that. From the last time this was asked, the marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis, the first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out and got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it, so he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans, and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note, these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, led to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week late, because they were still using the Julian calendar, in 1904. It gets crazier. You neglected to mention the one water stop was an intentional design choice and not simply lack of oversight. The director wanted to test his theory on purposeful dehydration during a marathon on unpaved roads while it was over 90 F outside. Truly next level incompetence. One of 11 children born to Charles and Maria Sachs, Adolf was an extremely accident-prone youth who barely made it to adulthood. At 3 he fell 3 floors down, bashing his head on the stone floor at the bottom. He drank a bowl of acidic water believing it was milk. He swallowed and subsequently passed a large needle. He flew across his father's workshop and was burned badly when a barrel of gunpowder exploded. He fell upon a hot cast iron pan on a stove, burning his side. He frequently slept in a room where varnished furniture was drying, somehow avoiding poisoning and asphyxiation. He was hit in the head with a slate roof tile while walking down the street. He fell in a river and nearly drowned. Then this same child, who some force was failing miserably to unalive, grew up and had the audacity to invent the saxophone. Operation Acoustic Kitty. In the 60s the CIA spent months and tens of millions of dollars to surgically bug and then train a cat to sit near foreign officials in order to transmit their private conversations to CIA operatives. The day of the first official test run they release the cat. It wanders into the street and is promptly hit by a taxi. The last known kill by bow and arrow in combat was actually during the Battle of Dunkirk, 1940. Jack Churchill landed a well-placed arrow into a German soldier's chest. He also chose to carry bagpipes and a Scottish longsword. That guy's story is insane. It also includes working as a model and actor before the war, getting captured, chucked in a POW camp, escaping, getting captured again, being liberated and then walking 93 miles to Italy, becoming a surf instructor after the war, confusing the crap out of commuters by launching his briefcase into his garden as his train passed so he didn't have to carry it home. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage from West Africa to Mecca, stops by Egypt ruined their economy because he was so rich he made the value of gold plummet, building a pool in the middle of the desert so that his first wife could swim, making it to Mecca with an entourage like Aladdin's after the genie. Heading back says sorry I fricked up the economy, I will buy my gold back, and heads back to his country like no biggie. Actually, no, this should be a movie, I would pay to watch it twice. Mansa Musa is said to be the richest man in history that has ever lived with a net worth of $400 billion. His convoy on the pilgrimage consisted of 60,000 people and 20,000 kilos of gold. The gold was distributed along the way. He distributed so much gold in Egypt that the value of gold in Egypt dropped dramatically and wiped out the local economy. Fascinating man. The Allies in Italy during World War II were blocked at one point by an old castle that defended a critical valley they needed to move through. The Nazis had taken it over and heavily fortified it with machine guns and artillery. Had a long ramp to the main gates that left the attackers open to MG fire. Back of the castle opened onto a sheer cliff. Destroying the castle wasn't an option. The British tried taking from the front and failed. The Americans tried the same thing with more men and also failed. Enter the Canadian army, who decided to scale the cliff at night, with all their gear, in complete silence and take the fort, and they did it. The assault on Mount Asoro. There was that time when a Bolivian water company tried to quadruple the price of water, and that was so comically over the top evil that James Bond Quantum of Solace had to tone it down so that their fictional version were only trying to double the price of water. The real life company were too preposterously wicked to be believable as a Bond villain. Let that sink in. I find it pretty crazy that there was a time and a place on Earth where there were big battles on mounted armored elephants, and where the enemy would use burning pigs to scare the elephants and trigger a stampede. Basically total chaos as you release your burning pigs. There's a video game called Rome, Total War that you might enjoy. Anti-tank dogs in World War II. The Soviet Union strapped bombs to dogs and trained the poor things to run under tanks where they'd blow up. 4 out of a group of 30 managed to damage German tanks, while 6 damaged Soviet soldiers in trenches. Well, the reason it failed is because the dogs were trained using Soviet tanks, so they would just blow up their own tanks because that's what they thought they were supposed to do. How about Audie Murphy, World War II hero who actually became a movie star? Starred in a movie about himself and his exploits, but they didn't include everything that actually happened because no one would believe it. Heck, they completely skipped over how he earned 2 of his silver stars. Some undeveloped cultures developed rituals in which they'd build fake airports and undress and act like soldiers in order to attract air cargo drops. After witnessing parts of wars, a pope once awarded a chemist a medal for fortifying wine with sea. The pope loved sea wine. A dying pope once got a blood transfusion from a young child and they both died. In the US during the 90s, people managed to call various restaurants and convince the managers to strip search female employees, and in one case a customer, on behalf of the police. Voltaire once gained the lottery and made millions. A brown bear named Wojtek once reached the rank of corporal. The presidency of Chester A. Arthur. This was a man neck deep in the political corruption machine back in the day. Every step of his career was built on the spoils system of the time, including how he became vice president. He enjoyed it too, building fabulous wealth during his time at the New York Custom House and giving favors to his associates as vice president. You would think that this man would only continue this as president, but no. In his very first address to Congress, he specifically requested civil service reform. He wanted to dismantle the very machine that got him his wealth and power. He was perfectly happy doing favors as a VP and being the recipient of other favors. But the second he became the big man, he wanted to change the whole system for the better. In a little under 2 years after Garfield's assassination, Arthur signed the reform bill that mandates government positions are awarded based on merit. Probably because he was horrified at the assassination of Garfield, which was motivated by his disdain for this sort of corruption. Operation Mincemeat. The Allies wanted to trick the Axis into thinking that they weren't going to invade Sicily, so they obtained the body of a recently deceased homeless person in London, dressed him up in a British officer's uniform and added a satchel full of top secret battle plans that gave phony invasion plans somewhere other than Sicily. Then they arranged for the body to wash up on shore in Spain, knowing that the Franco regime would open the documents and pass word on to Berlin and Rome. Tried to make it look like they hadn't opened the documents and returned them and the body to Britain, but British spies were able to confirm that Spain had opened the documents and taken the bait. Probably not absurd but not well known. During World War II, a balloon bomb was launched by Japan that killed a woman and her 5 kids in Oregon. They are the only casualties of World War II on US soil, not counting islands and other territories. Canadian World War II and Korean War veteran Leo Major, aka the Canadian pirate sniper. His World War II antics include capturing a group of some 40 Nazis by himself, but refusing an award for it since he hated his general or something, losing an eye in an explosion, but convinced his captain to let him stay because he only needed one eye to use a rifle, escaping a hospital with multiple broken ribs, 2 broken ankles and something wrong with his back, and went back into combat around a month later, capturing the entire Dutch city of Zwolle by himself by faking an invasion, capturing at least 100 Nazis while doing so, and setting fire to a nearby Nazi base. His Korean War antic was capturing a very crucial Chinese-controlled hill against all odds, some 200 Canadians against several thousand Chinese. Chinese revolutionaries blaming the sparrows for famine, which led to killing the population of sparrows and more famine, because they broke the ecosystem and the locust could spread. Draco, the ancient Greek lawmaker and namesake of draconian rule, which is known as excessively cruel, was actually beloved by his people. He was so beloved that, in fact, he died at a celebration held in his honor when Greek citizens threw their hats at him, a symbol of affection. However, the crowd threw so many hats that he ended up suffocating under them and died. Whether this is folklore or truth is hard to tell. While the event was well documented, some documents show that he was likely driven out of Athens, which would make more sense given his behavior. Just as with many Greek transcripts, the difference between fact and fiction is vague, but his escape from Athens is known. The guy was asked why the punishment for stealing an apple and murder are the same, death penalty, when they are obviously of a way different scale crime-wise. Draco replied, "I believe punishing a thief that stole an apple to death is a fair sentence. As for murder, there simply isn't an even worse punishment I can sentence him to, so I am forced to also sentence them to death." LMAO. Benjamin F. Wilson was already a World War II veteran when he enlisted in the Korean War. He had to take a demotion from lieutenant to private to do so, but he quickly rose back through the ranks. In 1951 he was put in charge of protecting a place that they called Heck Hill, and he knew that an attack was coming, but he remained with his men. He took a bullet to the leg and then went into a one-man charge to kill 7 and wound 2 Chinese soldiers alone. His men tried to take him for medical treatment, but when his stretcher was put down, he got up and limped back up the hill, just as everyone else was retreating. He charged alone with his rifle, killing 3 enemies. Then they took his rifle, so he killed 4 more with his entrenching shovel. The Chinese retreated for a while. The next day Wilson went on a one-man assault again to take down 33 more enemy soldiers, despite his existing wounds. This was a guy that just wouldn't be held down. Literally, this guy is too John Wick for John Wick. Wouldn't even pass as realistic. There's so many stories of random soldiers going apeshit in World War II. I wonder if there is some super soldier gene. Pol Pot. Some guy wants to take your country back to year 0 and employs kids to kill all the people that speak other languages or had any education. Bro. To add insult to injury, the guy himself received post-secondary education in a foreign country, other languages. Can't remember the details, but there was a tank in World War II that hid in a barn when one of the people scouting came back to the captain to tell him the enemy were approaching. The captain said very calmly with balls, "They've got us surrounded. The poor bastards." This is attributed to Cole Creighton S. Abrams, namesake of the M1 Abrams tank. He was a tank commander in the spearhead of Patton's 3rd Army, so wherever they were going in Europe he was normally in the front. This includes being partly in command of the forces that freed up the 101st Airborne during the Battle of the Bulge. In April 1917, in the midst of World War I, the Imperial German Zeppelin L-23 that was on sea patrol came across an honest-to-goodness wooden sailing ship from a non-combatant country that was transporting a non-war related cargo. It was the Norwegian schooner Royal, and was a holdover from a different era of shipping. The captain of the Zeppelin then gave an order said to be unique in aircraft history. "Gentlemen, prepare to board our prize." Unfortunately, as the boat from the Zeppelin was being lowered, the rough seas caused them to lose their machine gun overboard. So instead, the Zeppelin crew bluffed the schooner into submission with a flare gun. They sailed the schooner all the way back to Germany, in the only instance of airship-based piracy. The only instance so far. During a Viking raid in Luna in 859, the siege was led by Bjorn Ironside and Heastin. Heastin died, but before that he converted to Christianity because he wanted to be buried in Luna. 100 unarmed men went inside to deliver the body. Heastin jumped out of the coffin and his men took the weapons inside the coffin and sacked the city. But they failed successfully because they thought it was Rome, not Luna. Fun fact, this wasn't too absurd for television. While it was a different character, this did happen in Vikings. Second season, I think. The Darien Scheme. Scotland tried to colonize the Isthmus of Panama in November 1698. Within 8 months, 900 out of 1,200 colonists were dead of disease and starvation. The survivors abandoned the colony and fled to New York. Unbeknownst to the original group, 2 resupply ships with 300 more settlers were on their way. When that group arrived, they found a burned village and hundreds of graves. While they were there, one of their ships burned and they fled to Jamaica. When they got to Jamaica, the English government denied them entry. The original group returned to the site and found a burned ship but resumed trying to build a fort. None of this news made it back to Scotland and they had sent another 1,000 people to strengthen the colony. They expected to find an established fort but were asked to come ashore and start building. After some infighting and arrests, they established a fort but were eventually besieged by the Spanish. The colony was abandoned in January 1700. The debts incurred by this scheme were so high that Scottish nobles pushed for Scotland to unite with the Kingdom of England, forming the United Kingdom. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. If a screenwriter wrote a fictional script with the same chain of events, he'd be laughed out of the room. The time Julius Caesar was captured by pirates. In 75 BCE, a band of Cilician pirates in the Aegean Sea captured a 25-year-old Roman nobleman named Julius Caesar, who had been on his way to study oratory in Rhodes. As the story is related in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, the capture was a minor inconvenience for Caesar but very bad luck for the pirates. From the start, Caesar simply refused to behave like a captive. When the pirates told him that they had set his ransom at the sum of 20 talents, he laughed at them for not knowing who it was they had captured and suggested that 50 talents would be a more appropriate amount. He then sent his entourage out to gather the money and settled in for a period of captivity. The pirates must have been dumbfounded. It's not every day that a hostage negotiates his ransom up. Caesar made himself at home among the pirates, bossing them around and shushing them when he wanted to sleep. He made them listen to the speeches and poems that he was composing in his unanticipated downtime and berated them as illiterates if they weren't sufficiently impressed. He would participate in the pirates' games and exercises, but he always addressed them as if he were the commander and they were his subordinates. From time to time he would threaten to have them all crucified. They took it as a joke from their overconfident, slightly nutty captive. It wasn't a joke. After 38 days, the ransom was delivered and Caesar went free. Astonishingly, Caesar managed to raise a naval force in Miletus, despite holding no public or military office, and he set out in pursuit of the pirates. He found them still camped at the island where he had been held, and he brought them back as his captives. When the governor of Asia seemed to vacillate about punishing them, Caesar went to the prison where they were being held and had them all crucified. The Killdozer. Marvin Hemir walked in on his finance cheating on him the same year his dad died. Then his city wanted to buy his property to build a factory. When he rejected the offer, the city bought all the surrounding land and closed all the roads so he couldn't get to work. He bought all the equipment and materials to build a new road completely by himself, and when he asked the city if he could, they said no. He decided to put his equipment to good use and created the Killdozer. He went on a rampage, and at one point during his rampage a factory owner hopped in a tractor and they had a battle. He had sealed himself in the Killdozer, and when his oxygen was running low he shot himself in the head. It took the military 3 weeks and a specialized blowtorch to crack into it and recover his body. The military tried using C4 to get into it, but it was no match for the Killdozer's hull. There's a documentary on Netflix if you're interested. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.